Miguel's phone vibrated on his desk for the fifth time in the last 10 minutes. He barely glanced at the screen. Laura, his wife, was due any day now, but the last thing he could afford was a break. He adjusted his tie, flipped a page in the thick contract in front of him, and pressed the intercom button. Push the meeting back 30 minutes. But sir, 30 minutes. He ended the call before his assistant could protest. He finally picked up his phone. "We need to talk, please. Call me when you can. The doctor says I need to slow down. I feel exhausted. Mateus has a soccer match tonight. You promised." Miguel exhaled, rubbing his temples. He would call her later. He would make it up to the kids. He always did. He grabbed his briefcase and rushed out. The driver was waiting, but today he needed coffee. Instead of going straight to the office, he stopped by the bakery near the main square. Inside, the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee beans filled the air. The line was short, which suited him perfectly. He scrolled through his emails until something caught his attention. An elderly woman, frail and slightly hunched, stood at the counter, nervously digging into a small purse. The cashier tapped his fingers impatiently on the register. "Ma'am, it's $3.20. The woman frowned, counting the coins in her palm again. I think I only have $2.70, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The cashier sighed dramatically. "You need to decide, ma'am. There are people waiting." Miguel shifted his weight, feeling a strange discomfort settle in his chest. He knew this woman from somewhere. He studied her features, the deep wrinkles, the sad but kind eyes, the careful way she clutched her purse. "Just the coffee, then," she said finally, placing her money on the counter. Miguel hesitated. He could have paid for the bread without thinking twice, but his mind was elsewhere. He had meetings to attend, contracts to sign. Without another glance, he grabbed his order and left. As he walked to the car, a strange unease followed him, a whisper in the back of his mind that refused to be silenced. That evening, he arrived home late. Laura was on the couch, her feet propped up on a pillow. She looked tired, but her face brightened when she saw him. "You made it," she said, relieved. Miguel smiled, kissing her forehead. "Of course, I did." "Mateus was upset you missed the game." Guilt flickered in his chest. "I'll make it up to him." "You always say that?" Laura's voice was gentle but firm. Miguel exhaled. "Work was crazy today." He sat beside her, running a hand over his face. You've been distracted all evening," she observed. He hesitated, then finally admitted, "I saw someone today, an old woman at the bakery. I think I know her, but I can't remember from where." Laura tilted her head. "Maybe a family friend?" "No, it's something deeper. I just can't place it." She rested a hand on his arm. "Maybe you will." That night, Miguel barely slept. His mind kept circling back to the woman, her worn-out coat, the way she had counted her change with trembling fingers. And then, at 3 a.m, it hit him. Donna Estela, his breath caught in his throat. Memories, buried deep beneath years of work, success and distraction, came flooding back. He was 6 years old, sitting at a small wooden desk in a cold classroom. The other children had lunchboxes packed with sandwiches, fruit, and juice. His was empty. Donna Estela had noticed. She had knelt beside him, pressed a warm piece of bread into his hands, and whispered, "Eat, my dear. You need strength." She had been more than a teacher. She had been the only person in his childhood who ever truly saw him. And now she was standing in a bakery, unable to afford a piece of bread. Miguel sat up abruptly, his heart pounding. Tomorrow he would find her. Miguel woke up before dawn, his mind still racing from the realization that had struck him in the middle of the night. the weight of it pressed against his chest. Donna Estela, his childhood teacher, the only person who had ever shown him kindness when he had nothing, was now struggling to buy a piece of bread. He sat up in bed, careful not to wake Laura, and ran a hand over his face. The thought of her sitting alone in that bakery, counting her last few coins, unsettled him in a way he couldn't ignore. As the first hints of morning light slipped through the curtains, he got dressed, grabbed his keys, and left the house. The bakery was still closed when he arrived, its windows dark. He leaned against his car, waiting, his thoughts tangled in memories of a time he had buried long ago. The doors finally opened an hour later. Miguel stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the room. She wasn't there. The same cashier from the day before was behind the counter. He looked up, surprised to see Miguel so early. "Morning, sir. Coffee?" Miguel shook his head. "The woman from yesterday, the elderly lady, do you know her?" The cashier frowned. "Oh, you mean the one with the change. She comes by sometimes. Not every day, though." Miguel's chest tightened. "Do you know where she lives?" The cashier hesitated, then shrugged. "I think she stays in the park a few blocks down. Not sure, though." Miguel thanked him and left. His footsteps were quick, purposeful, as he made his way toward the park. The sun had fully risen by the time he arrived. The air was crisp, the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. He scanned the benches, the walking paths, looking for her familiar figure. And then he saw her. Donna Estela sat on an old wooden bench near a cluster of trees, her hands clasped around a worn-out scarf. She gazed ahead, her expression distant, lost in thought. Miguel's throat tightened. This woman had once been the strongest presence in his life. She had lifted him up when no one else had cared, and now she was here, alone, wrapped in a coat too thin for the season. He took a slow step forward. "Donna Estela." She turned her head slightly, blinking as she focused on him. Miguel swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. "It's me, Miguel." For a moment, she didn't move. Then her eyes widened just a fraction, recognition flickering across her tired face. "Miguel?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. He nodded, stepping closer. "Yes, He hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. "How did you begin a conversation with someone who had shaped your life, but whom you had abandoned to time?" She smiled, but it was faint, hesitant. You've grown into a fine man." He let out a breath, an unexpected tightness in his chest. "I should have recognized you yesterday. I should have stopped." Donna Estela waved a hand dismissively. "There was no reason for you to." But there had been. She was wrong. He sat down beside her, taking in the frailty of her hands, the way she clutched the scarf, like it was the only thing keeping her together. "What happened?" he asked gently. She hesitated, looking down at her lap. "Life," she said simply. He wasn't satisfied with that answer. "Donna Estela, please." She sighed, her fingers tightening around the fabric in her hands. "My son, he left, sold the house, took the money, told me he'd send for me, but that was years ago. I waited. I believed him." Miguel felt anger coil in his stomach, but he pushed it down. "And you've been here ever since?" She nodded. "I manage. Some nights are harder than others, but I get by." Miguel exhaled, shaking his head. "No, you're coming with me." Donna Estela's eyes widened slightly. "Miguel, I won't take no for an answer," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You took care of me when I had no one. Let me do the same for you." She hesitated, emotions flickering across her face. "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be." A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, she nodded. Miguel stood, offering his hand. She took it, her grip light but steady. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. Miguel helped Donna Estela into the car, carefully adjusting her seatbelt. She hesitated, her fingers grazing the buckle as if she wasn't used to such things anymore. He noticed the way she kept glancing at the world outside, her expression a mix of uncertainty and quiet acceptance. The drive home was filled with silence. Not an uncomfortable one, but rather the weight of emotions neither of them knew how to voice yet. Miguel stole glances at her through the rearview mirror, noticing how she clutched her old scarf as though it were the only piece of her past she had left. As they pulled up to the house, Miguel's heart pounded slightly. How would Laura react? And the kids? He hadn't prepared them for this. He stepped out first, opening the door for Donna Estela. She took his hand as she carefully stepped onto the driveway, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the grand two-story home. "Miguel," she murmured, hesitant, "this is where you live." He nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Yes, and now this is where you'll live too." Before she could protest, the front door swung open. Laura stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Miguel!" Her eyes flickered to the elderly woman beside him. Miguel cleared his throat. "Laura, this is Donna Estela. She was my teacher when I was a kid." "She's going to stay with us." Laura's gaze softened immediately. She walked down the steps, offering a warm smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Estela," she said gently, taking her hands in hers. "Any friend of Miguel's is family here." Donna Estela's lips trembled slightly, as if she weren't used to kindness anymore. "Thank you, dear." Suddenly, small footsteps echoed from inside. Mateus and Sophia rushed out, curiosity painted on their faces. "Who's she?" Mateus asked, tilting his head. Miguel knelt to their level. "Kids, this is Donna Estela. She was my teacher when I was your age." Sophia's eyes lit up. "So you were little like us?" Miguel chuckled. "Once upon a time." Donna Estela knelt with effort, reaching out a wrinkled hand. "It's lovely to meet you both." Sophia, ever fearless, threw her arms around the older woman. "You smell like cookies." Laughter erupted around them, and something in Donna Estela's expression shifted. The tightness in her face eased, and a warmth returned to her eyes. Miguel led them inside, and Laura wasted no time preparing a room for their guest. The house was warm, filled with soft lighting and the comforting scent of dinner. As Donna Estela settled into the guest room, she traced her fingers over the embroidered bedspread. It had been years since she'd had a bed of her own. Miguel leaned against the doorway, watching her. "If you need anything, just ask." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "You've already given me more than I ever expected." Miguel swallowed the lump in his throat. "You gave me everything when I was a child. I never forgot." That night, as he lay in bed beside Laura, he felt a strange sense of peace. It had been a long time since he had felt something like this, a completeness, as if a missing piece of his life had finally fallen into place. Donna Estela was home. Donna Estela's presence in the house settled in like the warmth of a long-lost memory. She moved with quiet grace, careful not to impose, yet her very existence filled the space with something indescribable. At breakfast the next morning, she sat at the table, watching as Laura placed plates in front of the children. Mateus and Sophia, still full of curiosity, scooted closer to her. "Do you know how to make pancakes?" Sophia asked, swinging her little legs under the chair. Donna Estela chuckled. "I do, but I used to make something even better, warm honey bread." Sophia's eyes widened. "Better than pancakes?" Miguel, sipping his coffee, glanced over the rim of his mug. He remembered that bread. It had been a rare comfort in a childhood that had felt so cold. Mateus leaned forward. "Can you teach us?" Laura, smiling at the enthusiasm, gestured toward the kitchen. I think we have everything you need. Donna Estela hesitated for only a moment before nodding. All right, but you two will have to help. Mateus and Sophia cheered, and just like that, the kitchen became a place of laughter and lessons. Flour dusted the countertops, tiny hands kneaded dough with varying degrees of success, and the scent of honey and cinnamon filled the house. Miguel stood in the doorway, watching it unfold. His wife, his children, and the woman who had once been the only light in his darkest days. Laura caught his gaze and walked over, touching his arm. She belongs here. Miguel swallowed. I know. Later that afternoon, as the house settled into a calm rhythm, Miguel found Donna Estela sitting on the back porch, knitting with slow, precise movements. He sat beside her, stretching his legs out. How are you feeling? She didn't look up. Grateful. A breeze drifted by, rustling the trees. I should have found you sooner, Miguel admitted, his voice low. Donna Estela paused, then shook her head. Life takes us where we need to go, and sometimes we find each other again when we're meant to. Miguel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't want you to ever feel alone again. She placed a wrinkled hand over his. I don't. For the first time in years, Miguel let himself sit in the quiet without rushing to his next obligation. Inside, the children's laughter echoed, and the scent of warm bread still lingered in the air. Donna Estela was home, and so was he. The seasons changed, and with them, so did the rhythm of Miguel's home. Where once there had been rushed mornings and hurried goodbyes, there was now laughter over breakfast, small hands kneading dough beside Donna Estela, and long conversations on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. She had become a pillar in their lives, a constant source of warmth. The children adored her, following her around as if she held all the secrets of the universe. Laura often found herself sitting by her side, soaking in her quiet wisdom. And Miguel had never felt more whole. But time, relentless and unforgiving, never stopped. One evening, as Laura folded baby clothes in the nursery, she winced, pressing a hand to her belly. A sharp pain ran through her, deeper than before. She took a slow breath, waiting for it to pass. But the ache only grew. A second later, her water broke. Miguel, she called, her voice tight with urgency. Miguel rushed in, eyes wide. It's time. Laura nodded, gripping his hand. It's time. Chaos erupted in the house. Miguel grabbed the hospital bag, trying not to panic. Mateus and Sophia stared with wide eyes as Laura was helped toward the door. Donna Estela took charge instantly. She knelt before the children, her voice steady and reassuring. Listen to me, my loves. Your mama and papa will be back soon, and when they return, you'll have a new baby sister. Sophia clung to her waist. But what if something happens? Donna Estela cupped her tiny face. Nothing will happen, my sweet girl. You and Mateus will stay with me, and we'll wait together. Miguel turned at the door, his heart aching, as he watched his children cling to the elderly woman they had come to love like a grandmother. Thank you, he whispered. She nodded. Go. Your family is growing. And then they were gone. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and hurried footsteps. Laura gripped Miguel's hand through each contraction, her forehead damp with sweat. Hours passed. Then, finally, a cry, a sharp, beautiful sound that cut through the exhaustion. Miguel felt something shift inside him, something deep and unshakable. As he looked at his newborn daughter in Laura's arms, he knew the name had already been chosen. Estela, he whispered. Laura turned to him, tired but smiling. After her. Miguel nodded. After the woman who gave me back everything I didn't know I had lost. When they returned home, Mateus and Sophia ran to meet them, eyes filled with excitement. But it was Dona Estela who stood frozen in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth as she stared at the tiny bundle in Laura's arms. Laura stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Come meet her." With trembling fingers, Dona Estela reached out, brushing the baby's soft cheek. "Her name," she murmured, "is Estela," Miguel finished. Tears slipped down the elderly woman's face. She pressed a hand to her heart, shaking her head. I don't deserve this." Miguel placed a firm hand over hers. "You deserve everything." Dona Estela let out a soft, broken laugh, her tears falling freely now. "Then I suppose," she whispered, "I have truly found home." And as she held little Estela in her arms, surrounded by the family that had become hers, she knew she had not just been saved. She had been loved back to life. Give a like, subscribe, and share. Help me grow.